Everyone, so long time no read. I know it's been a few weeks. I am feeling much better. I have a fun new crown on that tooth, and I'm not feeling any more jaw pain and just general face pain anymore. So I figured it would be a good time to, just get back to basics and get back to this channel. So to kind of address like what could be an elephant in the room, I took advantage of I'm going through a bunch of mouth pain anyway, and I've wanted a filter and piercing for a while. I may as well double up on that. So if for those who actually like actively watch, if my lip ends up doing a weird thing every once in a while, it's because I have a slight Dolly Parton / Lisa Rinna thing going on with swelling right here. But it's not, doesn't hurt, it's not uncomfortable, it's normal. So, I've missed this. I think some of my subscribers, hopefully you all have missed this. And let's just get back to basics. So I thought, it would be a good time to just revisit some of the more formative texts in, I suppose, what could be called weird internet studies. And why not pick one of the sacred tomes, the apocryphal scriptures, we could even venture to say, in terms of my concentration in terms of technocultures and religion, which is Blog Theory by Jodi. It has been some time since I've read this text, and I found myself wanting to revisit again recently, so why not share that with you all? Now, I suppose my cat is bumbling around, so if you hear any fun, weird noises, that's him. I suppose now, grab your blankets, grab your tea. I have my blanket, and get cozy. Chapter 2, Blog Theory by Jodi. The Death of Blogging. A sure sign of the triumph of a practice or idea is the declaration of its death. Early in the summer of 2007, the bell tolled for blogging, despite the fact that the number of blogs had exceeded 17 million and was continuing to rise. Throughout the ostensibly dead blogosphere, word spread rapidly that blogs had been killed by boredom, success, and even newer media, a weird contradiction whereby the content of the news was belied by the form of its blogged announcement. For some of the nudeness had, in fact, worn off. Having blogged, they were ready for something else. Some blog writers, tired of the demands of the format for regular updates. Relatable. It's one of the reasons I don't hold to hardcore deadlines with this. It's stress-inducing. They said that what they had to say and then had moved on. Some blog readers lost interest in the daily activities of so-called A-listers. Familiar with the voices and perspectives of widely popular long-term bloggers, they began turning their attention elsewhere to making videos for YouTube or lolcats for I Can Has Cheeseburger. Others lamented the repetitiveness of blog updates. After a few months of reading a given blog or frequenting a set of sites in the blog archipelago, predicting the range of responses to any post or comment was easy. In the words of a blogger quoted in an Australian newspaper, the same old people saying the same old things. Boring, boring, boring. Wasn't the increasing number of abandoned blogs, of ghost blogs with one or two posts left behind by those who tried blogging and then realized they had better ways to spend their time, clear evidence that blogging was dying as a practice? No. Accompanying the apparently rising rates of blog death was a phenomenon indicative of blogging's vitality, even if it was a culpable suspect in the death of blogging, the rise of corporate blogs. Well before the summer of 2007, blogs seemed to have reached a saturation point. Corporations had begun to monitor, intervene in, and attempt to produce conversations. As the Brand Republic website urged, by getting involved in user-generated content. You can get more people involved in your brand than they had ever been before, increase their loyalty, and even make them your brand advocates. You can even find out exactly what they think about your product. There's something in here. She wrote this, and I want to say 2000. What? It was early. Yeah, 2010. There's just something to be said there for microblogging platforms and general rapid content social media and MLMs, but that's outside of the scope of what we're doing here. Blogs provided access to information about customers' likes and dislikes, trends, and buzz previously available only in the survey snapshots of pollsters. By starting their own blogs, hiring bloggers, and participating in discussions related to their products, companies could market in another mode. They could tap niches and build brand awareness through more direct interactions with potential customers, even as they faced the problem of attracting readers to their blogs, of promoting their promotions, or advertising their advertising. By 2009, 70% of bloggers said they had blogged about brands. With brand attachment as a primary goal, corporate blogging came up against a key element of blogging, the conceit of authenticity. How could a blog ostensibly written by a logo or branded media image, or even an actual person paid to blog by the company, offer anything but spin? What would be the attraction of a blog that was all but advertising? Why would anyone visit that? In 2006, for example, bloggers outed McDonald's for foisting a fake blog on unsuspecting viewers in ads for the Super Bowl. Even worse were the computer-generated spam blogs, or splogs. Spam blogs scrape and grab content from anywhere on the internet and dump it on a blog that has been automatically generated. This content then shows up higher in search engine results, since it appears that more people are linking to it. When one searches the content and follows the link, one ends up at a site with a bunch of ads and thus contributes to the site owner's ad revenue. In December 2006, splogs were being created at the rate of about 11,000 a day. Combined with the generally recognized banality of most blogs, the proliferation of blog trash suggested a technology and a practice that had exceeded its use-by date. As blogging apparently suffocated under the excesses of its own success, new applications appeared to take its place, or, better, join it in an ever-intensifying expansion of media applications and practices. Some commentators viewed these new applications as more nails in blogging's coffin. Blogging was good while it lasted, but it was no longer fresh. It wasn't politically bold or culturally innovative, but the way one's aunt displayed her cat photos. Newer applications seem to be changing the conditions of possibility for blogging. With the addition of podcasting, photo blogging, and video blogging, the platform had been stretched as far as it could go. The most frequently invoked blog killers were large social networking sites like Facebook and MySpace, but microblogging practices like Twitter, parenthetical merging of SMS, short message service or texting in the internet created in 2006, were not far behind. Facebook and MySpace reconfigure the link, post, comment, and archive structure associated with blogs, rather than oriented around daily or even weekly posts on a regular set of themes or from a particular perspective. These large social network sites rely on brief, frequent updates to user profiles, lots of photos, and ever-growing lists of friends. Blog updates can be syndicated into one's profile and links can be shared with one's friends, but unlike blogs' reliance on the persona of the blogger, social network sites prioritize connections to others, whoever and whatever the others might be, such as bands, groups, and products, all available as potential friends on MySpace. Contacts matter more than information, angle, or opinion. Social network sites let one see one's connections, the others who are more than an audience of readers, and the colleagues and family members and friends of friends that constitute the communities that traverse specific locations. able quickly and easily to update one's friends on what one is doing. One doesn't have to spend a great deal of time involved with specific individual people. It's like friendship light or friendship without friendship, proto-parasocial. In other words, it's the overall series of objects or practices deprived of their harmful features that Slavoj Žižek associates with contemporary culture. Beer without alcohol, sugar-free candy, coffee without caffeine, etc. Even better, social network sites let us see ourselves as being seen. Instead of writing for strangers, a characteristic of blogs insofar as they are available to search engines, social network sites privilege sharing with friends, with a circuit of others that one has explicitly friended. Like Facebook and MySpace, Twitter also relies on social networks and short entries. Mobile users' text entries, tweets, of 140 characters or fewer as they go about their days, updating their followers on where they are, what they're doing, and what they think or feel at any given moment. It's like blogging stripped to its most banal, repetitive, and nonetheless connective and intimate features. The benefit over blogs is brevity. One can keep up without having to spend much time doing it, and mobility, as one can post and receive updates via mobile phone so one can always be connected. More significant is the performance of authenticity enabled by Twitter, along with Facebook's news feed and the mood updates on MySpace. The short glimpses into someone's life as it is being lived seem real. They seem real in part because they are only glimpses, fragments and indications rather than fully formed and composed reflections, and in part because we witness them being seen by others. Obscuring the larger setting of communicative capitalism, the declaration that blogs are dead hinders our thinking about contemporary media practices in their additive, supplementary, interlinking dimensions. Social network sites and Twitter don't replace blogs. They traverse, extend, and include them. According to the 2009 State of the Blogosphere report, 73% of bloggers versus 14% of the general population use Twitter. The percentage use among professional bloggers is even higher, as all bloggers say their number one use of Twitter is promoting their blogs. Ignoring the intermediation of contemporary communicative practices, the proclamation that blogs are dead repeats the criticisms of blogging that accompanied its emergence. Blogging is parasitic, narcissistic, and pointless. Since these criticisms neither prevented the rapid uptake of blogging nor actually cohere insofar as the accusations of parasitism and narcissism presume a point to blogging, even as they wrongly reduce blogs to either commentaries on other media or accounts of people's everyday experiences, they are better understood as descriptions. Blogging is parasitic, narcissistic, and pointless, and this is why internet users all over the world blog in ever-increasing numbers. The evidence offered for the death of the blog points to blogging's life even as it indexes ongoing turbulence, innovation, and obsolescence in media practices. As one blogger noted, which voice should I read this in? Hardly a day goes by without some intellectual or journalist or other member of the Only Our Opinion Counts Brigade writing something about how awful, stupid, passé, dumb, rude, uninteresting, or otherwise unacceptable blogs are. My unwanted advice to such writers is that if blogs really are as uncaptivating as you keep saying, and are as rapidly on their way to oblivion as you keep breathlessly announcing, then stop writing about them. I'm bringing back the voices, by the way. A side note, for those who have been with the Cozy Corner for a very, very long time, going as so far back as to when I was exclusively doing this in weird book groups, I did voices. Somewhere on the back burner of my to eventually upload are some incredible fan fiction and self-published fiction readings that are just exclusively voices. But I digress. Critical media theory easily risks the same mistake, proceeding as if networked media practices necessarily contain or accompany a guerrilla politics of minoritarian disruption, hacktivism, rather than emerge and persist as components of a vast commercial entertainment culture that has found a way to get the users to make the products they enjoy and even pay to do it. Just as the newness wore off for some English language early adopters, millions more across the globe were taking up blogging. Some of the most significant growth is in Asia. Over 61% of internet users have created blogs, compared to 18% in the UK, 21% in the US, and 8% in Germany. And over 80% of internet users in China, South Korea, and Malaysia have read blogs. In 2006, there were more blog posts per hour in Japanese than there were in English. That there was no longer an A list of elite bloggers, nearly always centered in and around and on the US, didn't mean blogging was dead. It meant that more people were blogging and that there were more blogs to read, and that the blogapelago was growing, expanding, and diversifying. It meant, in other words, that blogging had become an active component of contemporary media circuits. To accentuate the diversity among blogs, the way that bloggers do not constitute some kind of natural group, understand themselves as a collective, or interact in a common space, not least because of differences in language, culture, location, and interest, I favor the term blogapelago over the more common blogosphere. The term sphere suggests a space accessible to any and all. It implies a kind of conversational unity, as if bloggers addressed the same topics and participated in one giant discussion. The term blogosphere tricks us into thinking community when we should be asking about the kinds of links, networks, flows, and solidarities that blogs hinder and encourage. Blogapelago, like archipelago, reminds us of separateness, disconnection, and the immense effort it can take to move from one island or network to another. It incites us to attend to the variety of uses, engagements, and performances and intensities blogging contributes and circulates. Corporate uptake of blogging, while a nuisance to longtime bloggers, is a market version of the expansion and diversification of blogs. While apparent in companies' enthusiasm for identifying ever more specific and niche tastes and markets, the drive to monetize work and content seemingly offered free of charge accelerates blogging's centripetal. I can't pronounce that word, I'm sorry. Would it be a cozy corner reading if I just mispronounced a 101 word? If I didn't. It's like a quadruple negative in there. Far from inaugurating a new, creative, post-monetary commons, media practices like blogging and social networks ease the paths of neoliberal capitalism. Why should employers pay for work that we happily do for free? Blogging lives. Rather than the lingering remainders of the cultish enthusiasm for self-expression that is rapidly wearing off, the new technological forms and practices emerging around and from blogging indicate the spread and morphing of drives to connect and express. My concern here is to theorize critically the widespread uptake of blogging as a practice that emerges in a rapidly changing communications environment. Blogging is a way to access the current conjuncture of media, subjectivity, and politics, a conjuncture that I argue is best understood via the reflexive circuit of drive. Section 2. Blogging has been associated with murder and death ever since the mainstream media started noticing it around 2002. Just like video killed the radio star, film killed vaudeville, and television killed bowling leagues, so did blogs allegedly kill journalism and mainstream media, replacing these idiots and amateurs who failed to check their facts and ranted about their pet issues, as well as issues with their pets. There's a constant underlying all of this killing: corporate power. even as some media forms eclipse others. Global conglomerates profit from the innovations, while pernicious arrangements of state power benefit from a diverted populace. Television can't deliver the requisite eyeballs? No problem. Switch gears, locate other sites to capitalize. The dominance of capitalism as a system requires changes in industry, and innovation drives capitalism. State forms adapt as well. Disintegrated spectacles allow forever more advanced forms of monitoring, tracking, and surveillance. People plead for more cameras to keep them safe as they shop and happily relinquish personal data in exchange for saving a few cents here or there, for shaving seconds off of this site or that. The opposition of the death of the old and the vitality of the new, as well as the concomitant cries to condemn the old ways and celebrate the new, is a recurrent theme in technology and media writing that tells us nothing about the technologies and media practices involved. Inserting new actors into old series, the opposition between old and new obscures the practices and settings of technologies, the way technologies are used, and ways that are often diverse, conflicting, and unexpected, and the ways these uses produce different sorts of subjects. For example, in the 1970s, access to and knowledge of computing put one in an elite class of scientists and engineers. By the end of the 1980s, computer literacy was considered a core skill or competence. In the 21st century, spending time online is suspected to be as much of a time waster as watching television. Blogging's obituary, though, is not just premature. It's not just an error. Rather, it alerts us to a change in a practice, a change that appears as an effect of our looking back. When bloggers are killers ushering in of fundamental changes in media, politics, and journalism, they are understood within a logic of desire. That is, there is an underlying supposition that at some point in some time, people wanted blogs, that blogs were the objects of desire produced to fill a previous lack. For example, people didn't trust the mainstream media, so they started blogging in order to produce a journalism that they could trust. Augustus? Augustus is playing at the foot of my chair. I love my boy. The shift to death rhetoric marks a move away from this economy of desire and toward one of drive. When blogs are situated in the logic of drive, they aren't something that we want, but lack, aren't something introduced into a lack that they can't fill. They are objects difficult to avoid, elements of an inescapable circuit in which we are caught, compelled, and driven. In Lacanian, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Lacanian? I'm going to go with Lacanian from here on out. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, I swear I looked this up before. I never read him. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, desire and drive each designate a way that the subject relates to enjoyment. Desire is always a desire to desire, a desire that can never be filled, a desire for a jouissance that can never be attained. In contrast, drive attains jouissance in the repetitive process of not reaching it. Failure, or the thwarting of the aim, provides its own sort of success. If desire is like the path of an arrow, drive is like the course of the boomerang. What is fundamental at the level of drive, Lacan teaches us, is the movement outwards and back into which it is structured. One moment.
Lacan.
I'm looking this up right now. Lacanian. Okay. I have a computer. I can figure this out. Through this repetitive movement outward and back, the subject can miss its object but still achieve its aim. The subject can find satisfaction in the very circular movement of repeatedly missing its object. Because failure produces enjoyment, because the subject enjoys via repetition, drive captures the subject. Slavoj Žižek writes, drive is something in which the subject is caught, a kind of encephalous force which persists in its repetitive movement. The subject gets stuck doing the same thing over and over again because this doing produces enjoyment. Post, post, post. Click, click, click. Although Freud's thinking about drive changed over the course of his research, his view was typically rendered in terms of two drives, eros and thanatos, life and death, connection and separation. I just listened to this. Lock in. Shoot. Just listen to this. Lacan rejects this dichotomy, arguing that drive as such is death drive. Rather than involving some kind of a primary homeostasis or equilibrium, drives are a destabilizing force, a force that persists, that exerts a pressure without regard for the pleasure and well-being of the subject. As a persistence that does not for the sake of the subject, drive, then, has an almost undead quality. It is excessive, persisting beyond the ostensibly natural contours of life and death. In the Lacanian view, drive as death drive encompasses the way that even a drive for life results in paradoxes wherein saving life entails sacrificing it, pursuing life leads to risking it, and cherishing life looks like a bizarre fixation on morbidity. Turning back in on itself, turning into its opposite, the death drive is reflexive. Section 3. Blogs emerge out of the internet environment of the late 1990s, but not, as Geert Lovink points out, as the result of a movement or event. They are more like a special effect of software. Blogs are retroactive effects of network practices of storing and linking. In the words of Digital Methods Initiative, they are natively digital and in this way kin to threads, tags, links, and search engines. They've also spawned their own natively digital offspring, most specifically the post, as the primary unit designating a contribution, as opposed to the page, a key unit for the print culture that makes little sense in a digital environment. Blogging's kinship with search engines is particularly close. The first blogs were responding to the same problems that led to the development of search engines. How can one find something in particular on the internet? Already in the late 90s, the internet was imbued with a fantasy of abundance. Anything was possible. One could connect to anyone, say anything, find everything. The truth was out there. Locating something specific, though, was another question altogether. There seemed to be too much noise, too much chaos. Finding useful, not to mention reliable, information was a challenge. The first blogs, 23 counted in 1999, were logs of websites, signposts left by previous navigator to those who might want to follow his path, trace her links. The compiler of the list, or blogger, presented links to sites or articles she found particularly noteworthy. What made the list most helpful was the blogger's commentary, a description of the site or explanation as to why a given link was included. Commentary was the value added, the new content that made the blog itself worth visiting. The commentary let blog readers, those looking for reliable guides as they made their way through the web, know as to whether or not they could trust the blogger. One shouldn't forget, though, that the first blogs were only first later after bloggers were blogging. Blogs and search engines emerged in the place of a missing subject supposed to know, a concept from Lacanian psychoanalysis. Early searchers trying to make their way through the noise to find what they were looking for had to presuppose not only that they wanted was out there, a promise of abundance, but that they could also find it, a promise of access. Given the way abundance and everything, again, is out there, made searching infinitely time-consuming, and one needed help. Signposts, indexes, catalogs, portals, editors, search engines, so on. Before Google, there were multiple projects and paths attempting to provide this help. Blogs and search engines are two such projects, two fillings-ins of the place that emerged for a subject supposed to know. What was the subject supposed to know? Supposed to know, however, not just how to find information, but the truth of the searcher's desire. That is to say, those searching on the internet might not know what they actually want. They might call it one thing, but mean another. They might not know what they mean, not being able to put their desire into words. Search engines and blogs were established to occupy a place for the knower of our secrets, our desires, a place for one who would know what we wanted when we didn't really know ourselves. This supposition of a subject supposed to know is manifest in several different ways. One is hysterical. Faced with poor returns from a search query, the searcher responds with frustration. No, that's not it. There must be something else, something more, something better. Another response is paranoid. There must be something or someone behind the scenes collecting the data and distorting the results. Someone is watching, collecting, someone is looking for me. God, I miss doing voices so much. The paranoid response then exposes a tension. One wants to knowledge to be available, but one doesn't want to be known. One's expectations are structured through a fantasy of abundance. The truth is out there, while at the same time one wants to withhold an aspect of oneself. The whole truth is not out there. My truth, the truth of my desire, remains withheld. There's even a perverse response then that, again, demonstrates the underlying supposition of a subject supposed to know. The pervert positions himself as the instrument or guarantor of knowledge, the one who can deal with contingency, who can build a better search engine, come up with a completely reliable algorithm, serve as the vehicle for realizing the fantasy of abundance. Blogs and search engines are different approaches to the same problem, different occupations of the same place. They point, though, in different directions. Faced with the challenge of providing a trusted guide through a chaotic, indeterminable, changing field, search engines say, trust the algorithm. In contrast, blogs say, trust doesn't scale. So, while the former offers a reliability based in equations and crawl capacities, the latter says, know the knower. It focuses on the person providing the link, offering the searcher the opportunity to know this person, and so determine whether she can be trusted. Social network sites refract the problem of trust yet again. If the issue with blogs is the credibility of the guide or the writer, the issue for social network sites is the trust in the audience and the others who might be following me. Of course, this description is too simple. Like search engines, blogs are a technological application. For many commentators, the capabilities enabled by this application establish the definition of a blog, a collection of posts, each with its own permalink, appearing in reverse or chronological order, time-stamped and archived. Posts can be text, images, audio, and video. They may feature links to other blogs and other sites on the internet, and they may offer visitors an opportunity to comment. In her brief 2002 introduction to blogs, Meg Hourihan, observes how newness attaches readers to blogs. Because the newest posts appear first, readers can easily keep up to the minute track of what's blogged. They don't have to search through a site looking for the most current information. It's right in front of them. Likely provided by an RSS feed or newsreader. This immediacy helps tie readers to a site they follow developments in real time. Even more significant than the immediacy for attaching readers to blogs are those features of the blog format that contribute to cross-blog connections and conversations. Thus, Hourihan emphasizes the timestamp and the permalink as aspects of the blog format conducive to connectivity. The linking that happens through blogging creates the connections that bind us, she writes. Commentary alone is the province of journals, diaries, and editorial pieces, she says. Trust is more than code, and reliability is more than expertise and credentialing. Blogging responds to the problem of finding what one wants by offering something like a relationship, a connection. Section 4. What is a blog, anyway? Dana Boyd criticizes the metaphors on which early answers to the question relied. Not only does she point out the interests technology companies had in defining blogging, interests linked to effort to build and market their products, as well as set standards and expectations for what blogs would be and how they would function, she also rightly attends to the role of early researchers who treated blogging in terms of genre. The most prominent metaphors in those early attempts to define blogging were journals and journalism. Some researchers followed the lead of hosting services such as LiveJournal and viewing blogs as personal diaries or easily updatable journals. The diary metaphor creates a problem, though. What's appealing about networked personal diaries electronically available for anyone to read? Why would any person whatsoever want to read anyone else's boring journal? Because I'm nosy. I would never actually do, by the way, just to put that out there, but still nosy. And if the journal isn't boring, what sort of exhibitionist narcissist would inflict it on the entire world? Understood in terms of personal diaries, blogs seem but another aspect of the reality television craze, part of entertainment culture's preoccupation with celebrity. Other researchers agreed with the mainstream media and depicted blogs as new forms of citizen journalism. I wonder what they would have to say about left Twitter today. Whether they treat blogs as vehicles for local and on-the-ground reporting or as sites for the expression of individual opinions, these attempts to define blogs in terms of journalism open up a host of difficulties. The most apparent has been the failure of the mass majority of blogs to live up to the journalistic standards established for them. Bloggers generally lack the ethics and skills associated with professional journalism. Few do new and original reporting, but instead remediate the findings of real journalists as they mix into them their own strident, often vicious points of view. Approached as a genre, then, blogs turn out to be rather pathetic, at least from the perspective of mainstream media. Together, the two metaphors of journal and journalism configure the practice of blogging in terms of a private and a public sphere, failing to analyze or even acknowledge the inaptness of a modern spatial division as a way of thinking about contemporary media and communicative practices. Hey, Ox. Augustus. Baby. Hey. Hey. I just had a friend join me. Hey. What's up? Want to come hang out with me? Oh, please don't touch the mic. Please don't touch that. Augustus, please don't touch that. No, don't touch that. One moment. Nope, come here. Good boy. Good boy. Crisis averted. As of March 2010, Google's blogging service Blogger, which it had purchased from San Francisco-based Pyra Labs in 2002, was still relying on the journalism and journalism metaphors. Professional and amateur journalists... Oh, I'm going to read this in voice. What's a good technocrat voice? Professional and amateur journalists use blogs to publish breaking news, while personal journals reveal their inner thoughts. Whatever you have to say, Blogger can help you say it. Given the problems that arise when blogs are viewed as one genre, Boyd advocates viewing blogs as a medium, as more like radio or paper than a novel or opera. Blogs serve up content for an audience of anyone, perhaps a few of the blogger's friends, more likely for an uncertain number of strangers. As media, blogs change and evolve. They coexist and interlink with other media, such as print, video, telephoning, etc. To this extent, blogs are part of an open set of communicative practices and technologies, as the spam blogs enact anything, any gibberish whatsoever, can be content. What is communicated, the content of blogs, is secondary or tertiary to the fact of communication. In Boyd's words, blogs emerge because bloggers are blogging. Blogging is a medium for and practice of communication. Unlike mass media, it doesn't target an imaginary community of everyone in a nation, state, or city. Unlike one-to-one technologies like the telephone or a one-to-designated list technologies like email, blogging doesn't presume to reach a designated recipient. Nor does it rely on real-time interactions, live feeds, although various forms of syndication can alert readers when a blog has been updated. Instead, the medium enables the production of content specifically. I lost my train of thought very suddenly. Instead, the medium enables the production of content potentially accessible to anyone who happens to find it. Blogging opens up possible encounters with different and unexpected, whether in the form of a blogger's own reflection on what she posts and the reactions of others. Some of the officiants at blogging's premature funeral agree with Boyd on the centrality of the form. Writing for an electronic magazine based in Australia, Guy Rundle, it's one of those, compares blogs to the CB radio fad. As with CBs, should I do a voice for Guy? As with CBs, what thrilled people with blogs was the ecstasy of communication, the pure fact of being out. That sounds kind of mocking, though. I'm just going to read this in my normal voice. As with CBs, what thrilled people with blogs was the ecstasy of communication, pure fact that being out there in the wide cyber world and other worlds, in other words, the form rather than the content. What stales the experience is what some have thought was its greatest attraction. Its networked capacity, which makes everyone producer and consumer, and hence collapses the notion of an audience, as since time does not expand while blog numbers do. What most realize is that blogging is the illusion of connection, publishing into a void and thus doubly isolating, says Rundle. Rundle's claim for an illusion of collection relies on his Elysian of audience and communication. Yes, most of those who expected blogging to lead to fame and fortune, to make them respected pundits or highly paid authors, those who presumed that blogs were typed television, would have likely been disappointed. The evidence shows, however, that ever more people are being driven to communicate with others who may even be themselves, through blogs. The essence of the blog is the post. The post gets the blog off of the ground and then keeps it going. Oh, this is section 5. When posts stop, the blog dies. If the blog owner doesn't delete the entire blog, the posts may have an afterlife available to search engines. Yeah. My hair is still kind of drying. To search engines as viable permalinks on persisting blogs or even archived somewhere along with the rest of the internet. Even if the entire blog is deleted, the fact that posts can be copied, pasted, and repeated, that they can drift and circulate through the information networks of communicative capitalism, gives them a kind of haunting permanence. Posts are blogs, immortal remainders, revenants that once released can never be fully contained. The capacity of posts to circulate endlessly means that even dead blogs persists as digital zombies. What's in a post? Anything. Blogging subjectivity isn't narrativized, it's posted. It's not told as a story, but presented in moments as an image, reaction, feeling, or event. The post is a form that expresses mediality as such. Blogs, and even more so Twitter, catch oral communication in linear writing. Like a phone call or a text message, a post attempts connection. Facebook friends similarly poke each other or leave short remarks on others' walls. Unlike calls and text messages, though, blogs Blog posts are stored, archived, and accessible to virtually anyone. They are immediacy saved, conversations preserved. Posts persist as traces of their originators, whether the originators be individual groups or machines. Traces of the addition of something else. And the addition itself may be original. My voice, my image, my remix. I contribute to mark not simply the fact that I'm here, that I have a view, but that I am engaging. I am participating in the construction and extension of a manner of being together. If my addition is a tag or a link, it contributes to the force or impact of that which is tagged or linked, extending its visibility and viability. She actually says viability. I accidentally said visibility, but I feel that works too. Sorry, Jodi. It's no wonder then that blogging services provide so many tools for counting. How many lifetime page views, how many last month, how many today, how many this hour, which post generated the most hits, etc., which one accumulated the most links. This is actually why I don't do anything related to analytics, because it's pointless. They count additions, the expansions and extensions that are blogging. The value added then stems purely from the being added. Adding creates openings for new links or connections. Perhaps someone will respond. Perhaps the response will generate more posts, more responses, something like a relationship. This possibility infuses additions with feelings, makes them characters and transmitters of affect. Of course, a response may not be a comment. It may just be a visit, registered as a page view and counted. Even when there's no discernible response, my addition, my post, remains the opening it introduced, ready and present, available as a trace of my past to those who may find it in the future. Instead of judging blog posts as a literary form, it is more useful to consider them as a form of expression in between orality and literacy, or perhaps as a kind of secondary orality, to use Walter Ulm's term. While the idea of secondary orality remained relatively unexplored at the time of Ulm's death, his characterization of orally based thought attributes already key features of mobile, SMS, and online communication. 1. Thoughts are combined points. 1. Thoughts are combined and points are made in ways that are additive rather than supportive. Differently put, people, strings, and tactic elements together with and rather than subordinate clauses. 2. The elements of thoughts and ideas are aggregative rather than analytical. A contemporary example might be the slogans, cliches, and memes that catch on and stand in for ideas and feelings that remain unexplored. And that's Jodi Dean's parenthetical to number 2. 3. Ideas and points are frequently repeated. 4. Traditions are conserved, and parenthetically from Dean, because little to nothing is written down, remembering is difficult. Hence, not only do points need to be repeated, but they need to be attributed to tradition. 5. Ideas are understood in terms of their connection with actual experience, with the life world, rather than abstractly or within a more generally analytic field. 6. Knowledge and ideas appear agnostically polarized as part of everyday struggle. 7. Ideas are treated in terms of empathy and its lack, that is to say, in an immediate and participatory rather than a distanced fashion. Section 6. While Boyd is right to criticize reading blogs through the metaphors of journaling and journalism, understanding why these metaphors fail tells us something about blogging as a media practice. Yes, they fail because they focus on the content of blogs rather than the practice of blogging, an increasingly glaring and obvious mistake as ever more paid journalists blog. Blogs are cited in mainstream journalism as evidence from ordinary people. Bloggers appear in print and on television and radio, and internet content is delivered to mobile phones. The content focus can't keep multiply intersecting modes of communication in view. Additionally, rather than following the conventions of either journaling or journalism, blogging occurs in a space which opens up between them when the news that matters is news of me and my opinion. More important, though, the metaphors of journaling and journalism fail because their focus on the content misses the changes in subjectivity and setting in which the blogging is a part. The journaling metaphor takes for granted the personal identity of the subject as a diarist, an odd move given the likelihood that the blog is written pseudonymously. As journaling, blogging appears as a technology of the self. I literally, yeah. Oh, wow, I can't. Okay, side note. So, I actually just finished. Why I still need to finally edit and submit it. But my most recent project, what is called Markdown Elegies, the technologies of the identitarian self and the ambivalent internet, and it gets a lot of this in terms of how digital content, when we are kind of confronted with unintelligibility and subjectivity in these spaces, creates modes of self-fashioning and self-revelation that are Foucauldian in that manner, that they are technology of the self. But so it's crazy for me to read that right now because I haven't read blog theory in literal years. It's really cool seeing like, okay, yeah, things are coming together. Consilience. A way of documenting, reflecting on, and hence managing oneself. Although this idea has some intuitive appeal, it is belied by the long history of self-rewriting, which is one of the reasons, obviously, I veer towards disembodied, what would the term be? Ephemeral interconnections, I talk a lot about image boards, so ephemeral connections, ephemeral relationships via ambivalence, because blogging really complicates that. It doesn't complicate it necessarily, but you can't really apply this same framework whole to this idea of something that is not directly in what I would say, I suppose, is a real-time exchange, a real-time development, because blogging occurs, yes, it's a mode of self-fashioning, and it can be a technology of the self in terms of self-revelation through power networks. But within that, it's missing some key elements of how those interactions are embodied, because it's not compulsory to be a blogger. You can be a blogger with 0 follows, 0 whatever, So in a way, yes, the diarist model, the journal model fails because there's potentiality there for connection and insight and peeking in the box from a subject audience. But it's not inherent, Just, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but that's just my thoughts on that. It's one of the reasons I actually didn't really write on or examine specifically blogs so much as I did sites within certain neo-Nazi web rings that occurred as active dialogues. But anyway, let's get back to this. The reduction of blogging to journaling overlooks the immense historical variety in practices of writing and their relations to different kinds of selves, presuming a kind of singularity of the practice of self-writing. Moreover, this reduction takes as a given the continuity of the self, as if the technologies of the self are somehow not productive, as if the self stood behind the technologies of its own writing. Michel Foucault describes some of the early practices of the writing of the self. Oh, yes. Oh, this was one of my favorite parts of that lecture series. He has a real way of getting into there's a spirit to his prose when he's discussing pre-modern and early modern Christendom as it stands with self-fashioning, and I don't want to use development, but you know what I mean. In 1st and 2nd century Rome, writing contributed to an ascetic practice of the training of the self, of changing the character by positing another before whom one would feel a sense of shame. Yes, confessions! Oh, yes. Here, writing is not simply a method for I can't believe this stuck with me, like in the back of my mind. Oh, yeah. Here, writing is not simply a method for recording one's thoughts or reflecting on one's actions. It is a way of making present one is who is not there, yes. Of summoning up a companion in the imagination in order to feel the pressure of another's gaze. With the suppositions of an other and of shame before this other, 1st and 2nd century Romans, Foucault argues, construe writing as the technique for changing the self, not for simply recording its thoughts or for reflecting on these thoughts. Writing is a training with effects on an individual's character and practice. Foucault mentions the hupomenatema. Sorry. Individual notebooks that aided memory. These were records of reading, sayings, and thoughts, collections to be used for strength or sustenance when needed. Foucault explains that these collected writings, because I'm not going to do that to myself again, sorry, contributed to the formation of the self for 3 main reasons: the limiting effects of the coupling of reading with writing, the regular practice of the disparate that determines choices, and the appropriation which that practice brings about. Yes. Reading was thought to orient the mind towards novelty, to lead one to forget oneself and become scattered and distracted. By writing, one could affirm a set of truths which would constitute not only an object upon which to reflect, but a basis for action. Writing the fragments, in other words, enables the writer to subjectivize them, to make them his own aspects of specific identity. And just to part of one of the reasons I'm just so right here is that my underpinning framework for just my own academic research in general, and this, and specifically with marked analogies, is the work of Edward Bailey's Implicit Religions, which is fundamentally a sociological model for examining how endemic religious processes of self-revelation and self-construction, identity, psychospiritual reality, so on and so forth, can be cultivated outside of explicit religion, of I suppose the most accessible term is organized religion. And something that I am really, really loving right here, and that how she's tying Foucault together with blogging and the fashioning of the self and the honing of the self through witness, is essentially how I approached it in the implicit religious framework in the Foucauldian turn on Bailey's work, is that this is a process of witness. It is not just reflection. That's not to debase or diminish the idea of reflection, but within that, to be witnessed, even in the I suppose the term, in the Hegelian sense, even, it is a recursive depth of construction, and Technologies of the Self, I feel, is probably one of Foucault's best works on that idea, even if he doesn't get into the terminology of witness. However, the way he discusses cultivation, identity, writing through material culture, that sort of thing, absolutely, I feel, is all bound together by this underlying ideomythology of witness. Anyway, I'm just I'm just floored that, wow, yeah, okay, maybe I am actually onto something. That's a, it's just a really, really cool moment as an academic, as a writer, especially when you're kind of going marching to the beat of your own drum, and especially in small field like religions, of highly interdisciplinary and kind of really misunderstood field like religions, especially when the primordial basis for contemporary religions academia is primarily sociology. It's like sociology slash anthropology versus, I would suppose, uh, the theological regimes of the study of religion. When you're coming up against those, it can feel really, really alienating. And it has been, I have felt that alienation pretty recently, especially as I'm like getting further into the nascent stages of this work, in my ultimate goals in describing this way of relating to oneself, relating to the machine, and how the machine relates to us through an implicitly religious framework. So to see Jodi Dean a decade ago go this route with Foucauldian analysis of the technologies of the self, even if it's not in the same underlying baseline with which I approach it, really, really fucking cool. Oh, it's so cool. Oh, that just makes my heart warm. I suddenly feel like one of the reasons I've taken my break recently was because well, with this semester starting and everything, I just really wanted to step back a bit and really just focus on classwork program alongside like my throbbing face. And part of that, with my current religions courses, while I'm doing other interdisciplinary coursework, it's like I feel a small hole in religions right now, and that's a hole I know I have the skill to eventually like change or fill. But there's an underlying absence in the way it relates to technology and self-construction, because of inter-field issues regarding the idea of secularity and so on and so forth. And obviously, comparative religions overwhelmingly concentrates on explicit religion and expression, that sort of thing. So it's been a little frustrating because I've really kind of been, just the past few weeks have had me really questioning whether or not, like, if I should continue specifically with my ideas, in within a religious frame of mind, because it seemed so weird. It is so weird. When I was seeing these other scholars in different fields, like communication and even literature, which is so weird for me, get at these ideas in very rich ways, even if they're not coming from this baseline I want to attach to this analysis of whatever I'm getting at. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I just, reading this and seeing that there is like a precedence for this, and that it is intelligible, and that I can use that, and that I'm not crazy, it makes me really happy. I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was like probably like almost 10 minutes of just me talking. I just really, I know my future's bright. I just don't know where it is. but I really hope that I can make that happen for religions in some way. Oh. Thanks, Jodi. Another kind of self-writing was correspondence letter writing. The written letter enabled the author to make himself present to others when he was apart at a distance. Focusing on Stoic and Epicurean practices, Foucault observes, oh yeah, no, this is like getting at the heart of what I was doing with Markdown Elegies. And I've been putting off like finishing editing it because I just felt so frustrated with like, do I have a role to, do I have the right to do this within the comparative religion space? Do I have the right to essentially subvert what this is? Oh. To write is thus to show oneself a project, to project oneself into view, to make one's own face appear in the other's presence. And by this should be understood that the letter is both a gaze that one focuses on the addressee, through the missive he received, he feels looked at, and a way of offering oneself to his gaze by one tells him about himself. The reciprocity of that correspondence establishes is not simply that of counsel and aid. It is the reciprocity of the gaze in that examination. That's sacred. That's what I'm doing. I really needed that. Letters did not need to be about anything in particular. As a technique of itself, they weren't highlighting major events, but rather testifying to the quality of a mode of being. Cicero, for example, was quite explicit about his affection for correspondence for its own sake, regardless of whether he had anything to say. I prefer to write an empty letter than to not write at all. And then this is all I have for you, nothing new. Why bother then to write? And when we are together and chatter away with whatever comes into our heads, surely there's some value in causerie, in which the mere interchange of talk is agreeable, even if there is nothing behind it. Yes. For Foucault, the ordinariness, the fact that nothing much has happened, is what is noteworthy. Review of the ordinary gave one insight into the kind of life one leads and thus was ideal to a practice of self-examination. We might also emphasize the way that expressing whatever comes into our into our heads creates an opening to another, an opportunity for connection. What matters, Cicero tells us, is less the content that enables connection than the connection itself. There is some value in causerie or chat, a value attached to the interchange. 8chan is a religious space. Don't at me. Oh my god. Yeah, this is why I do this. While attentive to the technology of the self, Foucault was less concerned with the technologies of writing. Early written Latin used interpuncts to designate separations between words. As the Romans borrowed more letter forms and vowels from the Greeks, however, they adopted the Greek practice of scriptura, continua, or uninterrupted writing. That is, their letters were spaced equally apart regardless of the beginning and ending of words. Scriptura continua made retrieving information after it had been read difficult, to say the least. Unlike the Greeks, moreover, the Romans did not use page numbers, foliation, or catchwords, and only rarely paragraphs. To ease... Sorry, I just felt loose there for a moment. To ease the presentation of textual material. Perhaps because of the suspicion of the reading that Foucault notes, Romans did not want to make reading any easier. Thomas N. Habeneck, makes the point more directly, arguing that the material difficulties associated with reading and writing were convenient means of keeping literature in the hands of the well-to-do elite. For wealthy Romans, writing was generally dictation and reading was generally being read to. The aristocratic writer relied on the hands and skills of another who was actually reading or writing. Well-educated scribes had the difficult task of making sense of written Latin. Reading was slow, painstaking, and more often done aloud or in a low mumble. Vocalization made it easier to turn letters into language sounds and language sounds into meanings. To be sure, the use of scribes contributed to problems in authentication, problems addressed through the development of distinct personal styles and expression as well as the use of seals. Elite households often employed trained lectors who performed texts for assembled groups. Texts then provided opportunities for conversation and discussion. They were more than just the expression of an author. William A. Johnson writes, "The odd format of the book roll itself intersects with the fact that literary texts were commonly read in the sense of a small group listening to a performance by a reader. The strict, one wants to say obsessive attention to continuous flow in the design of the ancient book interlocks with the idea that it was the reader's job to bring the text alive, to insert the prosodic features and elocutionary force lacking in the writing system. A continuous role was played by the reader in so much that the way we play a videotape or a witness or a stage performance, or witness a stage performance. I really needed this. Even personal letters were often copied, circulated, and read in groups, much like pamphlets or newspapers in the later times. Reading in groups was a common practice, a social activity, and a type of entertainment. It was self-writing. If self-writing was a technology of the self, it was a technology deeply interlinked with connection to an audience and community. Reading and writing for the ancient Romans had aesthetic elements tied to the pleasures of engagement with others. I'm not gonna cry. That would not be appropriate for like a first video pack, but I'm feeling a little emotional. I really, really needed that. Section 7. Paul Sanger writes, "Word separation can be regarded as a product of the frontier civilizations that had developed at the periphery of what had been the Roman Empire. Throughout history, intellectual, technical, and social innovations have often first appeared on the margins of well-established cultures. America and Japan can properly be regarded as frontier civilizations, the former of Europe, the latter of China. Though in the early Middle Ages the impetus for restructuring the page had come from the literary achievements of the empire's northern frontier, by the early 10th century the prominence of insular authors identified with word separation such as Bede, Alcuin, Cedulus, I'm so sorry, Scotus, a couple Scotuses, and the anonymous compilers of glossaries had waned. A new corpus of scientific knowledge, and with it a new impetus for the adoption of word separation, sprang forth in another linguistic frontier zone, that of the Mozarabic of Spain. A product of globalization, blogging similarly emerges at the intersections of differing languages, cultures, discourses, as the subsumption or folding into one another of their edges and frontiers. The imagistic properties of text that enable words to be seen as distinct units of meaning, as direct correspondence to objects and acts in the world, continue to intensify in this millennium as they did in the previous two. Can one easily glean or absorb or be impressed by a written word and be impressed so quickly that one hasn't quite read it? Can one quickly identify a link? Quickly ascertain the presence or absence of something new? Can one immediately discern the structure of the visual field so that one knows what not to read, where to put one's time or effort? Color, space, images, all these establish the visual fields of blogs. Section 8. Foucault's technologies of self rely on the installation of the gaze, of the perspective of another before whom the subject imagines itself. She has so much more scholarship than me, so I'm not gonna actively disagree with her on that because I don't know enough to really have a firm opinion. But I don't really co-sign that. But anyway. In the first instance, the installation of this gaze can be thought of as the substitution of a symbolic position in the place of the audience of the others, customary in classical textual performances. For the subject, this gaze constitutes an other who registers my acts in the symbolic network. It provides the subject with an ego ideal, a point of symbolic identification. Zizek argues that this gaze is a crucial supposition for the subject's capacity to act. The gaze qua ego ideal is the point from which one sees one's actions as valuable and worthwhile, as making sense. Absent that gaze, one may feel trapped, passive, or unsure as to the point of doing anything at all. To this extent, identifying with the gaze enables the subject's activity. The gaze structures our relation to our practices. For example, instead of experiencing the state as a myriad forms and organizations, branches and edicts, presences and regulations in our daily activities, we tend to posit the state as a kind of entity, an other aware of what we are doing. Similarly, we may posit an enemy assessing our every action. The point is that through symbolic identification, the subject posits the very entity it understands itself as responding to. How it imagines this other will be crucial to the kinds of activities the subject can undertake. Weirdly, then, the active subject has to posit a kind of passivity, that is, a passive other before whom the subject appears. The subject has to imagine himself, in other words, as fascinating the other, as doing something or saying something, or even watching something that captivates the other. Let's play streamers. As Zizek emphasizes, the gaze is thus reflexive, doubled insofar as the subject sees itself being seen. The one who is captivated, in other words, is the subject. Although the subject needs to posit a gaze in order to understand its acts as mattering, registering, there is something disturbing about the gaze, something foreign and excessive, unchosen and unwanted. Zizek writes that in the case of the gaze, the point at which the subject makes himself seen retains its dramatic heterogeneity and non-transparency. It remains an object in a strict Lacanian sense, not a symbolic feature. In a setting of multiply interlinked media, we are never quite certain to what we have made ourselves visible. We don't know who is looking at us or how they are looking. We can't even be sure as to whether there is a single or multiple perspectives. What databases are we in? Who has Googled us and why? This disturbing uncertainty points to a second, more traumatic version of the gaze. The gaze not as the big other of ego ideal, but what is Lacan refers to as the small other, objet petit a. In this version, the gaze refers to our own entrapment in the field of the visible. I am seen only from one point, but in my existence I am looked at from all sides. What one sees is always incomplete and in need of being filled in. Yet this filling in necessarily brings with it inadequacies and distortions. The subject might fill in what he wants to see. His desire may fill in the gaps he encounters. He may then be aware of such a gap and his involvement in it, feeling himself somehow seen or even vulnerable. Each side of this relation to the gap, to allure or stain in the invisible field, the side of seeing it and being seen seeing it, is an aspect of the gaze. Joan Kopchek's reading of Freud is one of the best accounts of the gaze. Freud's argument, she explains, distinguishes the act of looking at oneself through the intermediary of an alien object from the act of looking at oneself through an alien person. The first concerns that reflexive circuit by by which one apprehends itself in the categories of the culture to which one belongs or someone else one wishes to please, with the result that one thereby regards themselves as a known or knowable object. The second concerns a completely different kind of circuit, that of the passive, active drive, which turns around on itself. In this case, because I do not expose myself to the look of a determinate other, I do not receive a message back regarding my determinate identity. The reflexive circuit of scopic drive does not produce a knowledgeable object. It produces a transgression of the pleasure principle by forcing a hole in it. The scopic drive produces an exorbitant pleasure that disrupts the ego identity formed by the first circuit. She writes, I thought I once saw the postman sitting in his delivery truck cuddling a puppy. This seemed odd. At a second glance revealed that he was sorting letters and that there was no puppy. I immediately felt embarrassed, even rather ashamed. It was almost as if there were a gaze in the postman-missing puppy complex that saw me see myself as making this bizarre mistake. But that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think that's one of the things that kind of, that there's a disjuncture between the way I approach gaze fundamentally than these interpretations, because yes, there is absolutely an overwhelming insidiousness to it. However, at the same time, I do think that, especially in an implicitly religious turn, that there is room for joy. Like, that's wonderful. Like, to have all of these different bodily signifiers build up to one moment where you make that mistake. I don't know. I guess it's just I've kind of unlearned that sort of kinesthetic linguistic embarrassment, especially just in the past couple of years. That's wonderful. Like, oh, I thought you were doing that other thing. And it's really cool that your mind made that connection. And I think it says something about you. Something that should be cherished. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, Jodi Bean. In Locke's words, generally speaking, the relation between the gaze and what one wishes to see involves allure. The subject is not presented as other than he is, and what one shows him is not what he wishes to see. Gaze, then. Also, I know she meant this as like just an illustrative example, but she fundamentally does not have the power of gaze in that way. In these minute interactions. I think that's something that definitely gets really caught up when we discuss gaze and when we discuss self-fashioning, that sort of thing, is that these instantaneous, beautiful interactions in their embodiment, there is a certain limit to which you can use the terminology of gaze, because gaze to me, and to Foucault even, implies a certain level of power. Just saying. I don't know. I mean, yes, I see what she means, but I think there's a limit to that. That's all. Anyway. Gaze then refers not to a specific person whom one imagines being seen, but rather to a more unsettling feeling of an excess disturbing of one seeing, both in terms of what one sees and in one's being seen. Yes. Yeah. Caveat. However, yes, in the technological, yeah, Okay, here we go. Some bloggers find themselves disoriented by the experience that people they know read their blogs. We presumed that we were posting for strangers and ended up more exposed than we expected. Our families, friends, colleagues, or employers were lurking on our blogs, learning about our passions and idiosyncrasies. The audiences before whom we perform our identities, child, expert, collector, lover, converged, undermining the separations and distinctions that told us who we were, rendering us nothing in particular, but still something. Blogging is a technology uncoupled from the illusion of a core, true, and essential singular self. You know, that's something I've actually really had to do a lot of work on, especially in terms of the way I engage in digital media and like social media technology and that sort of thing. Because I do have friends who watch my channel, and I hope you're watching. That would be really cool. And in that, I have, I think, in terms of code switching, I suppose, and having disparate selves, I could never quite perform that segmentation very well, so it doesn't quite bother me. I don't know. It's just something I've been pondering on. Anyway, I really, really need to continue reading this. Sorry. This was such a good text, I think, to kick back up the channel with. It's very life restoring. It reminds me why I'm doing this. The subjects of blogs are fragmented, appearing as neither true nor false, just appearing as whatever they happen to post. More formally put, in communicative capitalism, the gaze to which one makes oneself visible is a point hidden in an opaque and heterogeneous network. It is not the gaze of the symbolic other, of our ego ideal, but the more disturbing, traumatic gaze of the gap of excess, objet petitard. Our disclosures are surveyed, archived, remembered in ways that exceed our ability to manage or control. On one hand, this is the source of their immense attraction, what lures us in, what incites us to practices of revelation and display. On the other, the media that incite us to create and express, to offer our thoughts, feelings, and expressions freely, to participate, but in what? Deliver us up to others to use for purposes of their own. Yeah, oh wow. That's a big mood. That's actually another thing I really had to unpack going into starting this project. And also one of the reasons I don't have like any other social media is because I had to make my peace like a long time ago with the idea that my content and who I am exists in others' real estate, and what they do with it, I don't know, and that can be very scary. And yeah, the way she describes that as a traumatic gaze is very like, yes, but I think there is a space beyond that. However, the space beyond that that can only really be reached by doing some real hardcore unpacking on one's relationship with technology. Like, I'm a flip phone user for a reason, that sort of thing, you know? Because I reached this security in the knowledge that I have no security, that the gaze is no longer traumatic to me, by allowing myself to exit these very conditioned digital native generation ideas of validation and so forth. So that's just a side note. Because one is never sure how one is being seen, one is never certain of one's place in a symbolic order. How exactly are we being looked at? One never really knows who one is, despite all the cameras, files, media, and databases. A celebrity gamer in one place is elsewhere just another kid. A famous jazz musician may have zero name recognition among economists. Someone with 1 million friends on MySpace may be no one at all to the rest of us. Facebook tries to help us out with this by supplying endless quizzes that promise to tell us who we really are, which Lord of the Rings character, which famous philosopher, which ferocious animal. Who one is in the social symbolic order is uncertain and ever-changing. The order is never fixed. It is in this constant flux. Zizek tags this flux and uncertainty as a decline in symbolic efficiency. Which, yeah, that is. In terms of the Lacanian theory, the decline of symbolic efficiency is accompanied by a convergence between the imaginary and the real. Imaginary identities sustained by the promise and provision of enjoyment replace symbolic identities. The global information and financial networks of communicative capitalism offer new ways for us to imagine ourselves, immense varieties of lifestyles with which we can experiment. Each can and must be creative, different, unique. Each must develop a distinctive personal style. These unique identities, though, are extremely vulnerable. The frames of reference that give them meaning and value are constantly shifting. Challenges to these identities and can appear at any moment. Their successes, achievements, and capacities to enjoy too easily call our own into question. So while it may seem that the decline of symbolic efficiency ushers in a new era of freedom from rigid norms and expectations, the fluidity and adaptability of imaginary identities are accompanied by fragility and insecurity. Imaginary identities are incapable of establishing a firm place to stand, a position from which one can make sense of one's experiences, one's worlds. Hold on. Yeah. Blogs mark and mediate these identities, whatever they may be. That's just it. They're not imaginary. They're not. Social networking sites respond to the decline of symbolic efficiency. Anxious before the gaze, before the disturbing inquiries and intrusions of unknown others, unsure about what to expect, about whether one is succeeding or failing, whether others are friends or foes, we build more reliable, apparently more intimate networks. We may not know everyone in our intimate network, but we know they're friends. We had to friend them. Someone has vouched for them. We share a connection or have a connection produced for us by virtue of the games and gifts available on the site. Oh, I'm just feeling a deep cringe. Not that this, just all of that. Yeah, that happened. Farmville happened. With fewer strangers, these networks are less stressful than the open uncertainties disrupting our attempts to sense who we are or might be. There are people we can trust, people who share with us little moments of their day, assuring us that there may be some reality that we have in common. Presenting our lives and activities to our network, we attempt to install in ourselves a capacity for action. Maybe that's why cyberbullying emerged with such force in 2007. It's not that there weren't bullies before MySpace and Facebook. Bloggers have always complained about trolls. It's that people have continued to believe in and search for connection. To emphasize the decline of symbolic efficiency, Section 9. To emphasize the decline of symbolic efficiencies, to emphasize a retreat from or effacement of the law of desire and an amplification of the logic of drive. The primary setting for our activity as communicating subjects is not law and its transgression, but drive's repetitive circuit. Zizek explains the difference between desire and drive via a change in the position and function of the objet petit a. He writes, although in both cases the link between object and loss is crucial, the case of the objet a is the object of desire, we have an object which was originally lost, which coincides with its own loss, which emerges as lost, while, in the case of the objet a, as the object of drive, the object is directly the loss itself. In the shift from desire to drive, we pass from the lost object to the loss itself as an object. That is to say, the weird movement called drive is not driven by the impossible quest for the lost object. It is a push to directly enact the loss. The gap, cut, distance itself. And Mackenzie Wark actually has some really interesting writings about that in her writing on cutting and violence. I think it's in one of the Hacker Quarterlies. I have to dig up that reading again. Drive is a kind of compulsion or force. Oh, and this is back to Dean. Drive is a kind of compulsion or force. It's a force that is shaped. It takes on its form and pulsion from a loss. Drive is loss as a force, or the force loss exerts on the field of desire. The compulsive movement of drive shapes networked media as they enact the loss of symbolic efficiency. This enactment is not an effort to restore the symbolic, rather it's the extraordinarily plastic movement of the drives, to borrow Freud's expression. Freud continues, they may appear in each other's places, one of them may accumulate the intensity of the other. That the drive is thwarted or sublimated means that it reaches its goal by other means, through other objects. Blocked in one direction, it splits into multiple vectors, into a network. If Freud views the process as akin to the flow of water into multiple tributaries and canals, we might also think of it as an encephalic power's attempt to constitute and reach its objects by any means necessary, and then do it again and again and again and again, getting a little enjoyment in each repetition. Lacan emphasizes that the drives are partial drives. He specifies this idea as a partial with regard to the biological finality of sexuality. I understand the point to refer to the variety of changing, incomplete, and dispersed ways subjects enjoy. Drives do not develop in a linear fashion from infant to adult. They fragment and disperse as they satisfy themselves with a variety of objects. As Kopchak writes, it is as if the very function of the drive were this continuous opening up of small fractures between things. Her language here is precise. The fractures are not of things, but between them. The parts that are objects of the drives are not parts of wholes, but parts that appear in the force of loss as new expressions of a whole. She uses Deleuze's example of the role of the close-up as cinematic device. It's not part of a scene enlarged, rather it's an expression of the whole of the scene. Lacan refers to the partial object as an object of lack, an object that emerges in the void of the drive to provide the subject with satisfaction. Correlative to the part is a further aspect of drive that Lacan, I just suddenly forgot how to pronounce that. Lacan renders as montage, a constant jumping without transition between heterogeneous elements. Montage suggests movement without message, movement with intensity, movement outward and back. Disparate images and sounds shift and mutate without beginning or end, head or tail. Lacan, I think the resulting image would show the working of a dynamo connected to a gas tap. A peacock's feather emerges and tickles the belly of a pretty woman who is just lying there looking beautiful. More contemporary ways to understand montage are mashups, samples, and remixes, or better, are very movement through contemporary communication in entertainment networks. I enter, I click, I like, I poke. Drive circulates round and round, producing the satisfaction even as it misses its aim, even as it emerges in the plastic network of the decline of symbolic efficiency. Section 10. In the Ethics of Psychoanalysis, Lacan positions drive between the two deaths, symbolic death and the death of the organism. Blogging after the death of blogs persists in an analogous domain of the drive. Caught in the circuits of communicative capitalism out of which it emerged, it persists, whether in the form of fully automated blogs, the remnants of past posts excavated and ranked by Google, or our compulsions to make ourselves seen. That is a very good place to end off with. I'm glad I'd kind of planned ahead on that one. Oh, I really need a drink of water. Okay, so, wow. Yeah, I really needed that. That was a great text to pick E-Codex back up on. Oh my gosh, no, I've been playing with my hair this whole time. I know, so now it's all messy. But, yeah. So, thank you for sitting with me. Let me think if there's any business to wrap up. So, I have decided I am going to go for quality over quantity. I really like sitting down and carving out 2-3 hours once every week and a half to do this. And I feel like you guys in the comments kind of mirrored that's just more entertaining and I think productive for you guys as listeners, viewers. Still don't know exactly what to call you guys. If someone would like to propose like a name for the kinship network of E-Codex, that would be very cool. But anyways, yeah, no, that was just really great and very thought-provoking. And I feel centered. Oh, I don't mean that in the culturally appropriate way. I just mean like center. But yeah. What should... Oh, and one more bit of housework. House cleaning? Duties? However, whatever the idiom is. So moving forward, I've already discussed that quality, quantity thing. I do have a couple surgeries coming up, I think around March or April. I'm fine. It's just routine medical stuff. I don't foresee that being a major disruption. I don't foresee having to do this type of break again, but I will definitely try and do a more preemptive announcement leading up into that. And because I definitely didn't like leaving you guys hanging for a few days and then dropping another one where it's like, I don't know when I'm going to be back, but it's going to be soon, and then taking like another week. That's kind of rude, and I don't like doing that. So just as a heads up, there may be another little gap coming up around March or April. I don't know yet. We're still scheduling. Everything is fine. It's all good. But in that, I think I have addressed everything that needs to be addressed. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this evening. I hoped this was a good introduction to Jodi Dean's extremely important, extremely informative work, Blog Theory, if you haven't read it or you're not familiar with it. And if you are, I hope my commentary wasn't completely, what's the word? Disjointed? Anyway, what should my sign off this evening be? Signing off from your techno-spiritualist, blogger... No, not the blogger babe. Ooh. Signing off from your techno-spiritualist, WordPress hagiographer, and general good group reader in the great Roman tradition. Oh wait, Doomer GF. Yeah, wow, I am out of practice. Night, guys.